This week, we're talking about the government's anticipated and unprecedented move to extend the state of emergency indefinitely here in Victoria. We'll be discussing the idea of a further Labor split with Steve Campbell, Secretary of the DLP. And lastly, should first home buyers be granted access to $50,000 from their super for a deposit? In Victoria, the Andrews government first declared a state of emergency on the 16th of March under our Public Health and Wellbeing Act. Section 198, subsections 7B and C state that the state of emergency continues in force for 4 weeks and can be extended for further 4-week periods, but only up to a maximum of 6 months. Section 200 specifies what those powers are: to detain people in an area to eliminate or reduce a serious risk to public health, to restrict the movement of people, to prevent others from entering an emergency area, to give any other direction that an authorised officer considers reasonably necessary to protect public health, such as searching a premises without a warrant. And this section also requires that a warning should be given that a refusal or failure to comply with directions without a reasonable excuse is an offence. This week, the state of emergency was extended until the 13th of September, maxing out the 6-month limit for the total allowable time for Victoria to be in a state of emergency under the Public Health and Wellbeing Act. A further extension is only possible if the Public Health and Wellbeing Act is amended, which is already being discussed.
The Premier is currently working with the Solicitor General to introduce new legislation and amendments that would allow it to be extended for as long as necessary.
It's disheartening that such a significant amendment to extend these extraordinary powers of government was not at all flagged with the Parliament or the public. It wasn't until the media broke the story that the opposition were able to shine a light on what this means in terms of the impact on the rights of the individual. Rightly so, the opposition leader, Michael O'Brien, came out charging on this hush-hush move by the Andrews government when it came to light. He said, "We will vigorously oppose Daniel Andrews' push to indefinitely extend his state of emergency powers. No government deserves a blank cheque for such extraordinary powers over Victorians' lives and livelihoods. Governments must be accountable to the people, not the other way around." On the 17th of August, the Shadow Attorney General, Ed O'Donoghue, wrote to Premier Andrews after the media reports on what he plans to do. He wrote that the state of emergency vests enormous power with you and a small number of unelected officials within very little capacity for oversight and accountability, as demonstrated by the way you have effectively shut down the Legislative Assembly. Before extending these extraordinary powers is even considered by the opposition, any further extension to the state of emergency must be accompanied by enhanced security and safeguards enshrined in legislation at an absolute minimum. This would include a statutory requirement for each House of Parliament to sit regularly during a state of emergency period, mandatory briefings to Parliament, and only short, limited extensions to the state of emergency. But throughout this pandemic, the Victorian government have wielded power like dictators, treating all non-Labor MPs with contempt, completely ignoring their cries for transparency and accountability in decision-making, not even allowing the Legislative Assembly to sit and provide the parliamentary scrutiny the public expect and deserve. Let's see if the Andrews government decides to act any differently and actually deigns to provide a response to the Shadow Attorney General. Also this week, Federal Labor Shadow Minister Joel Fitzgibbon argued that there could be a split in Labor. In a very telling interview, Fitzgibbon said that, "I'm just old enough to remember when politicians were able to say one thing on one side of the continent and another thing on the other and get away with it. But that's not possible these days." Wow, what an incredible statement to make about Labor tactics. He highlighted Labor's inability to appeal to inner-city voters with ultra-progressive policies and at the same time win over regional voters, saying, "I just don't know how we reconcile the difficulty of being all things to all people in Batman, in Melbourne, and another thing to a group of people living in central Queensland." It really is a case of deja vu. Back in 1955, the Democratic Labor Party split from the ALP because of a very similar ideological divide. Steve Campbell is the National Secretary for the DLP. Welcome, Steve.
Thank you for having me, Karina.
So, what happened to cause the original split with the Labor Party, and are Joel Fitzgibbon's warnings a case of history repeating itself?
Look, the original split occurred when basically the left wing of the DLP, through a group of unions in an organisation called the Industrial Group, has cleaned out communism from quite a few of the unions that have been infiltrated for a number of years. And then in the 1950s, mid-50s, Doc Evatt, who was the head of the ALP at the time, blamed these groupers for causing him to lose the 1954 election. That spilled over to infighting within the party between the left and the right wing, as they were at the time. And the Victorian State Executive, which was heavily controlled by what became the DLP, was expelled unconstitutionally from the ALP. So it was basically a communist move, which has now been recognised as a valid communist infiltration of the ALP that led to the split in 1955. What's happening with Joel Fitzgibbon? I don't really know that's exactly the same thing. There certainly has been another strong surge in the left wing in the ALP. His reasons for saying it: either he's extremely brave and doing what most ALP members of parliament won't do, and that's speak out against their party publicly, or he's doing it for his own strategic reasons, possibly moving towards a position of gaining greater control within the party, possibly even a leadership move at some point.
And do you think his comments are reasonable if he's not just trying to position himself as a potential leadership contender? Are they reasonable in terms of that ideological divide? And can the Labor Party remain one party when, you know, a lot of its policies are so far leaning to the left, and yet still try and maintain its traditional base?
I think they've ostracised much of their base already. We do get a number of people who come and support us and speak to us, even though we're a smaller Labor Party. They come to us and they're very disgruntled with what's been going on for a number of years. The recent left-wing takeover, basically, of the Victorian branch by Daniel Andrews and Anthony Albanese in removing the democratic right of all their members to vote for pre-selections and handing it over to the left-wing executive is pure socialism. So I can see why most of the members are pretty disheartened in what laughingly refers to itself as a Labor Party. Is this the same thing occurring? I don't know it's the same thing occurring as before, but there certainly are problems with divisions. Look, I don't necessarily know that a lot of people in the ALP have got the same form of principles as the members of parliament in the ALP in the 1950s. I think it's much more of a career-driven thing for some of them. But after what's happened with Adam Someric, for instance, and some of the members of the right wing in the ALP in Victoria, you can see that there's definitely been a move with the left wing to gain more and more control. And one thing about the left, they're vastly more patient than the right. They will go out of power to get more power. They don't care.
Yeah, absolutely. And I can't believe that ALP members don't feel more disenfranchised, or perhaps they are, and that's why they're coming across to the DLP, given that when it comes to a pre-selection, the rank and file have the same, I suppose, voting authority or power as the unions. And then we recently saw the captain's picks by Anastasia Palaszczuk in Queensland. How does, that work?
Well, how it works is undemocratically. It's the constitution of the ALP is relatively clear that they shouldn't be doing any of these sort of things, but they've acted unconstitutionally in the past. And this is not to say everybody in the ALP is doing the wrong thing. There are some good principled people in that party, not as many as there should be, but there are some good people, like in all parties. I think the problem here is that the members have, for years, have been hanging on, waiting for some glimpse of a renewal in the ALP to demonstrate that they are worthy of the name Labor. And I think it's got to the point now that they've done their dash. They've had enough of it. Our vote around at the last federal election, for instance, went up considerably, a long way. I think we were up 400% in the in the last federal election in Victoria, which demonstrates that people are crying out for another Labor Party. We're smaller, less resourced than the ALP, but we're getting there slowly. And people know that they at least have some people with some principles there.
And do you think, I suppose, if there were a further split in the Labor Party, could there be a coalition, or could the DLP and the ALP ever work together in a coalition as such?
Originally, the intention was back in 1955 when there was a split, and I'll take you to task on one thing. The Supreme Court of Victoria already declared the DLP to be the legitimate Labor Party, not the ALP. So that was back in 1960. But after the split, there was a hope among the DLP members and members of Parliament that the ALP might come to its senses, might swing back towards the right, and the DLP and the ALP may be able to come together. It was as far up to even Gough Whitlam attempted to form some sort of a coalition between the two in the late 60s and very early 70s. But it just was not going to work while the ALP was extreme left wing. And quite frankly, some of their policies, even though some of their policies we agree with, we've got no problem with that, socially and ethically, a lot of their policies and their intentions are not the sort of thing the DLP would support. I can't see it happening. I mean, Joel Fitzgibbon's talking about a split in 20 years. That's more likely to happen than the DLP amalgamating with the ALP. But if the ALP split into a left and a right, certainly the DLP be there talking to the right wing.
And I encourage all people out there who are centre-right, who share the Liberal Party's values, to get involved in the Liberal Party. But for those who are, more aligned in
those
their
who want a
thinking
good
to
traditional
that of
Labor Party.
Yes. What would you say if they're thinking about, can I get involved in the ALP and try and fix it from the inside? Is it possible?
Well, you've just seen that they've taken all the democratic rights away from their members. In the snap of the fingers, Albanese and Andrews said, no, we're better at doing this than you are because we can put our left-wing people in. So if you really want somebody who's genuinely a Labor Party with traditional Labor policies, family-based Labor policies that are not socialist, then in that case, have a good look at the DLP. Just go onto our website, dlp.org.au, have a look. If it's interesting to you, send me an email or join.
Usually I'm saying it, but the other way around. But it's good.
Oh, that's okay. Got to spruik where you can.
Absolutely. Thanks very much for coming on today.
Pleasure, Karina.
Now, when Danita Wan, Chief Executive of Industry Association Master Builders Australia and Director of CBUS, the largest industry super fund for the building, construction and allied industries, suggested this week that first home buyers should have access up to $50,000 of their superannuation for part of a deposit, I'm sure she never anticipated the storm that would erupt. Former Victorian Labor Premier and CBUS Chair Steve Bracks hit back after union leaders, surprise, surprise, super industry groups and board directors became upset, saying Warren's proposal would drive up house prices. But Warren held her ground, noting that it's extraordinary that Master Builders is under attack for opening a debate about home ownership and the need to stimulate economic growth in the largest economic crisis since the Depression. In relation to Warren's proposal, federal Liberal MP John Alexander said that the biggest single contributor to poverty in retirement is not owning your own home. Warren makes a very important point. Allowing first home buyers to use their super for a partial deposit is not irresponsible spending, but a long-term investment with far greater benefits than any investment a fund manager could make on someone's behalf. Instead of sinking money in rent, people would be putting money towards an asset for long-term security and for the peace of mind home ownership brings in terms of owning where you live and not being at the whim of a landlord who could turf you out for any of a long list of reasons, including no reason at all. Of course, superannuation is important to ensure that as our population ages, the welfare system isn't overburdened by the amount of pension to be paid, but surely people are not so irresponsible or so reckless in their spending that they can't be trusted to have any say over how their money is invested. There's a vast difference between a house and a credit card debt racked up on TVs and high heels. Certainly, taking on a mortgage would increase household debt, But there is good debt and there is bad debt. Just like governments investing in nation building infrastructure is good debt, families taking out mortgages to buy a home is security in every sense of the word, a stable home and an asset. In the days before super, many would save their money to purchase a home and other assets instead of saving for retirement. In retirement, they would rely on a pension, being asset rich and cash poor. But today, things have swung too far the other way. While younger working people will have superannuation savings for retirement, they may never be able to afford a home. Using the same mechanism of superannuation, the younger generation could realistically be set on the path to home ownership. All it takes is a policy adjustment like the one Master Builder proposes. It's notable that if you're in severe financial hardship or have compassionate grounds, you can access your superannuation savings to make payments towards an overdue mortgage and even council rates to prevent you from losing a home that you already have. So while presently value is seen in using superannuation to make payments to keep a home, why isn't this the case for purchasing one? Clearly, there's a policy inconsistency here. What cogent reasons could explain why it's compassionate to let you spend your super to keep your home but not to acquire one? Well, this would mean that the super funds have less money in them and therefore less profits. Super funds are big business. As such, they have the muscle to flex in opposing any policies that might reduce their income. To challenge them is never easy, but aren't a stable housing market, a thriving building industry, and the Australian dream of owning your own home not worth it? Well, that's another week wrapped up in lockdown. Don't forget to tune in to Conservative One with George Christensen on the Good Source on Saturday. Subscribe to goodsource.news, like and leave a comment here. And to take us out this week, for all those political nerds out there, this viral ad by the Republican candidate for Baltimore sets a powerful new standard in campaign advertising. I'm sure you will agree.
Do you care about Black lives? The people that run Baltimore don't. I can prove it. Walk with me. They don't want you to see this. I'm Kim Klasick. This is Baltimore, the real Baltimore. This is the reality for Black people every single day. Crumbling infrastructure, abandoned homes, poverty, and crime. Baltimore has been run by the Democrat Party for 53 years. What is the result of their decades of leadership? Baltimore is one of the top 5 most dangerous cities in America. The murder rate in Baltimore is 10 times the US average. The Baltimore poverty rate is over 20%. Homicide, drug, and alcohol deaths are skyrocketing in our city. Do you believe Black Lives Matter? I do. The vast majority of crime in Baltimore is perpetrated against Black people, who make up 60% of the population. So why don't we care about our communities? The Democrat Party have betrayed the Black people of Baltimore. If the politicians walked the streets like I do, they would see exactly how their policies and corruption affects us. But they don't want to see it. They don't want you to see this. Go to any Baltimore neighborhood and ask this question. Do you want to defund the police?
No.
No.
Absolutely not.
I had 3 sons killed in Baltimore City. And I think if we defund the police office, it's going to be worse than that. So, no, I'm opposed to that.
What are you going to defund the police for? Why? How do you defend your city, your community? Families are losing people.
It's not just Baltimore. The worst place for a Black person to live in America is a Democrat-controlled city. It's 2020. Name a blue city where Black people's lives have gotten better. Try. I'll wait. Look at this. How are children supposed to live here and play here? Democrats think Black people are stupid. They think they can control us forever, that we won't demand better, and that we'll keep voting for them forever, despite what they've done to our families and our communities. Are they right? I'm Kim Klasick, and I'm running for Congress because I actually care about Black lives. All Black lives matter. Our communities matter. Baltimore matters. And Black people don't have to vote Democrat.